Hey, this is Brandon Brittingham of the Maryland and Delaware Group along with Foster.
And Rich Barr with the Maryland and Delaware Group along in Foster as well. And today we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about foreclosures. So, Brandon, back when you guys started, I know that you handled a ton of foreclosures and short sales and all that kind of stuff. So, can you just kind of tell us really what the definition of a foreclosure and maybe even a short sale?
Yeah, so short sale we don't see too much of anymore. You in any market you have foreclosures. When things got bad in the recession, you had a ton of foreclosures. I mean, essentially, a foreclosure is somebody owned the house, there was a mortgage on it, and for whatever reason, that person stopped paying the mortgage, and the bank or finance company, whoever had the mortgage on it, filed foreclosure proceedings, went through the process, and they've taken possession back of the property. So essentially, that's what a foreclosure is. Also referred to a lot as an REO. Short sale is when you are still in the house and you owe more money on it than it's worth, but you want to sell it. And the bank, rather than foreclose, will generally work with you to take less than that's owed on your mortgage to not have to put you through foreclosure.
Gotcha. So, like you said, we don't see a ton of short sales anymore, at least right now. But we still do come across, a decent amount of foreclosures and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that I run across a lot of is a lot of clients, they'll call or ask questions, say, hey, I see this foreclosure, or maybe they don't even know it's a foreclosure. They see that it's, something that it's lower price. They might not totally even understand that it is a foreclosure or anything like that. So from maybe a client's perspective, if you might be interested in a foreclosure, it's not really the easiest process to go through. Can you kind of maybe walk us through that and maybe some of the pros and cons of even thinking about a foreclosure?
Yeah, so I think sometimes when a property goes through foreclosure, it comes back on the market, it's for sale. It's typically a lot cheaper than other houses in the neighborhood. So that's the allure, right? Mm-hmm. That's the attraction. Oh, I can get a really good deal. But the reality of it is, first and foremost, if you've never purchased a foreclosure, and let's just say like this is the first house you want to buy, I don't know that I would suggest your first house be a foreclosure unless you're accustomed to buying properties that need repairs, things of that nature, right? So I think sometimes there's, stuff on the internet, infomercials, whatever, buy foreclosures, buy foreclosures, buy foreclosures. The reality of it is that typically in the state of Maryland, specifically, a foreclosure has probably sat vacant for a year and a half to 2 years, at least. Mm-hmm. A lot of stuff can go wrong in the house. It's not being maintained, water damage, shingle blows off the roof, you get a leak, you get busted pipes. A myriad of things can go wrong, right? So, you think, okay, all the houses in the neighborhood are 175, this one's 130. But when you really get through the process and you look at what it's going to take to make that house livable and fix the major things, it's maybe not as good of a deal as you think that it is, right? So, and then just kind of holistically looking at it is, so when you buy a foreclosure from a bank, you have to sign a bank foreclosure contract. You have to sign the bank's contract, and that is mainly one-sided to protect the bank. Doesn't offer you a whole heck of a lot of protection as a buyer that, say, the state of Maryland contract affords you. Same in Delaware. And typically a bank sells the property as is, which means there are exceptions to the rule, but I'd say 98% of the time they sell it as is. So take the same example, you're a first-time home buyer and you're working with limited resources financially, and you have to spend a bunch of money on your inspections, and a bunch of things come back wrong that are potential deal breakers, and the bank's not willing to fix it. Right? So you're out all those money in inspections. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of good home inspectors that are out there. Human error is possible. You know what I mean? Where you could buy a foreclosure and something gets missed, and do you know what I mean? Something behind a wall or something in the roof that got missed and nobody saw it, or whatever the case is, or problem with the HVAC. I mean, you just never know. The reality of it is, statistically, the propensity of you having a issue with the foreclosure is way higher than your standard resale.
Sure.
So I think the biggest thing is people, get like sucked into it's such a good deal, but you got to look past that and what's all the things that go into it. And you can still get a really good deal on a foreclosure, but you got to understand the condition side of it, and then also kind of the bank contract side of it.
Well, and I'll tell you, if you could speak kind of to maybe some of the pitfalls on the financing side too. A lot of times, you get those phone calls and all that kind of stuff, and the consumer doesn't know what they don't know. So
Right.
you look and you say, well, probably needs $20,000 worth of repairs. Well, can you finance that? How do you go about getting a loan for it? All that kind of stuff. And I think if you can explain that a little bit, it's a little more tricky than just going out and getting your normal loan.
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the things we hear all the time is, well, $90,000 property, let me borrow 20 and fix it up. Those types of loans are out there. However, for most people, you got to put 20% down. It's a commercial loan. You got to know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Your first time home buyer, or you're getting a VA loan or USDA loan or FHA. So those three loan types, FHA, USDA, VA, here on the Eastern Shore, that's probably going to account for 85-90% of all of your buyers.
Sure.
Meaning you're going to get one of those loans to finance. Well, they require that the property is in a certain type of condition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to send their own appraiser out to check the condition of the property. And there's certain things that have to be in order for them to finance, the property.
Mm-hmm.
And, most foreclosures, you're going to have things wrong. So they go out, they say this, and this needs to be fixed. And then the bank says, well, we're not fixing it. You knew that going into it. So then that affects your ability to get financing.
Yeah.
There are FHA renovation programs. It's a difficult process. And again, if you're not seasoned in it,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a challenge. And, we hear it all the time where people are like, well, we'll just figure out financing it. And it's just not that simple. For most type of financing that's out there, for most buyers in this area, foreclosure is not going to work unless it's in really, really good condition, which that's a rarity too.
Sure. So basically, when you're talking about the financing aspect, most of the traditional styles of financing that, the majority of our clients might be using probably isn't going to work for a foreclosure is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah. And then I think also it's stressful enough for most people when it comes to buying a house. There's a lot of things you're dealing with that you don't normally deal with.
Mm-hmm.
You're relocating, right? Financially, it's the most money you've probably ever spent in your life. And, a bank transaction, a foreclosure is not a smooth transaction. There can be issues with the title. There's all kinds of things that you uncover. And, if it's not a local bank, the bank out of town, whatever the case is, they just want to get the most amount of money they can.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not necessarily as agreeable as your traditional seller. So it can be a rocky process. And their contracts are completely one-sided. So, again, I think that buyers get in their mind, I want to go after a foreclosure because I can get a really good deal, where the flip side of that is if you get a good agent, you can get a good deal and not have to go through the headache and just all the stress that you go through when it comes to foreclosures. We as investors buy foreclosures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult enough for us to get one to the table.
Sure.
And we have all of the knowledge and the processes and systems to, fix the properties up, understanding of the contract, whatever the case is. And that's kind of another thing is you don't necessarily know you're going to go to settlement the day that the bank
Right.
says because of title. With them getting title in the state of Maryland through the foreclosure process,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things can pop up. And then so you think you're going to settlement that day and something happens and, they don't have clear title to give you, so you can't go to settlement.
Right. And you just kind of made me think of something here, if we back up, of as far as like kind of the good deal on a foreclosure, a lot of times we'll get those phone calls to say, hey, this is a foreclosure, it's listed for $150,000. And that client, said from everything that they've heard and some of the things that they've seen and all that kind of stuff, I can buy that for what, $70,000, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about
excellent,
that.
Yeah, excellent point. So there, for the longest time, was information that got put out there on the internet or by whoever just to sell you a product that, hey, take this course. I'm going to teach you how to buy foreclosures on 50 cents on the dollar. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen. Not saying that it can't. However, when a bank lists a foreclosure, they get an appraisal, right? When we list foreclosures, they ask us what our opinion of value is, right? Sometimes the bank initially is higher. They put it higher than what we think it's worth or than what the appraisal is. That's not out of the ordinary. However, especially in today's market where there are sellers, there are investors like us and other people that are real estate investors that will buy it at a certain number, right? That we can still make it work at not 50 cents on the dollar. It is a rarity that a bank takes a huge, cut in value. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The value is what the value is. They're going to only deviate from that so much. I've seen them come off 20, 25%, but that was circumstances where the property had sat for a really long time, things of that nature. Now, if they find out that there's major structural things wrong with the property that is going to be a huge impediment in getting it sold, then that's where you might have the rarity of them taking an extreme discount. However, that extreme discount is compensating for the fact that something major is wrong, like mold in the crawl space, the roof's leaking, HVAC shot, septic completely failed, whatever the case is. But especially when a bank first lists a property, 40, 50%, what it's listed for, them taking that much of a haircut, that just doesn't happen. That's not reality.
Yeah, and typically too, with a bank, you're not dealing with, your traditional seller.
Right.
So, it's very, I get spreadsheeted out, if you will. It's not really, it's just not a traditional sale.
Yeah.
So, you have somebody that's looking at it and they're going to look at the amount of, days on market and things like that. And they're really only going to adjust probably once every 30 days, things like that. So, it's been my experience too that, just because it's a foreclosure, yeah, can you get a good deal? Maybe, maybe not, depending on what it looks like in your eyes, but it's not necessarily, like dealing with that traditional seller.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think that the biggest myth and misconception is that all foreclosures are a steal. You're going to get a great deal on every one. You can. Don't get me wrong. I think it's more, especially now, tailored to the seasoned investor.
Yeah.
Right? That knows how to go and evaluate it. It's not going to cost them full retail to renovate the property if it needs renovation. They are equipped to deal with the issues that come up as a foreclosure. Not saying that you can't get one as a homeowner, but I think that you got to go into it with your eyes wide open and be extremely prepared. And also have the idea that you can get some sweat equity and you can get a good deal, but a traditional FHA, VA, USDA loan, it's probably going to be tough to do so. And if it's your first house that you're buying, don't necessarily know that that's the best fit because there's probably a lot of work that you're going to have to do before you can even move into the property. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. There's still infomercials running at night that say, call us, we'll teach you how to buy a foreclosure for 60 cents on the dollar.
Right. And there's probably some of that misconception too, kind of that the HGTV, where, hey, we're going to walk in here, we're going to blow this wall out and we're going to do this, that,
for $10.
and the other. Right.
Yeah.
But, again, the financing aspect, what do you actually know about, what you can and can't do to the home, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, from my perspective, most of the times, with foreclosures, not to say they don't work out, for your first home or whatever for your for you and your family to live in, but it does seem like the majority of the time it ends up being something kind of better for an investor. You and I do a lot of investing, and not to totally get into the weeds, but if talk a little bit about maybe what are some of the differences of when an investor goes in to buy a foreclosure, maybe even some of the financing is different, all that kind of stuff, how it kind of gets done on the investment side, and maybe why it doesn't always get done, from a traditional mortgage standpoint.
Yeah, so most of your investors have cash, right, or some form of financing that to the bank it looks like cash. So they pull money off of a credit line, or they have relationships with local banks that aren't governed by the secondary mortgage market that puts more restrictions on condition of a property, right? So, and the other challenge with that is if you're a homeowner and you're trying to buy a foreclosure that 9 times out of 10, you're competing with these type of buyers that are out there.
Right.
So if you, and to your point about financing, sometimes a bank will not take a contract that says FHA, VA, or USDA on it, right? Because they know the condition is not going to warrant it. So, and from a condition standpoint, sometimes the bank might not even know if the heat even works.
Right.
Or like, you know, is your driveway in your neighbor's yard? Or there's just so many things that you just don't know that, you know, you have to spend the money and do the diligence to find out. But your average investor has some type of financing set up that's not governed by the same rules, or they pay cash. And when you're up against a cash offer in real estate, when you're dealing with a bank, it's tough to compete with that. Do you know what I mean? So especially if you're, you know, it's a lot to balance if you're a homeowner trying to figure this out for the first time, that, you know, you don't get as good of a deal as I think it is, you know, thought of.
To get you, to kind of get you to that final product. You know, if when an investor buys a foreclosure, let's say, you know, they're not trying to move into it the next day.
Right.
You know, so they've got the time, you know, to go in and to fix it up and to do whatever they're going to do. And same, you know, kind of on the financing side, not only do they have the availability to purchase it possibly with cash or pull it from a credit line, but they also have the money set aside, you know, for the renovations and things like that, you know. And so those are, you know, some of those things that really, in that scenario, kind of maybe set an investor apart than, you know, from the average person that's looking to buy a house.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about this on another episode, but I think if you, number one, we're huge believers of if you want to build wealth, you can build wealth through real estate, right? You look at some of the biggest fortunes that have been made in this country have been made off of investing in real estate. It's a great asset class to put your money. However, you know, I think if you're going to buy foreclosures for the long term, hold them, you know what I mean, for rental properties, I think that's a great way to look at foreclosures as far as buying them through real estate. You know, the first time home buyer buying it one time and trying to make it work, there's just so many things you got to figure out that it's difficult to fit in that box. Do you know what I mean?
The home buying process can be difficult enough
As it is,
let alone kind of throwing, you know, the foreclosure aspect into it.
Absolutely. And the thing about it is, which we've done this before, you have a couple foreclosures in a neighborhood, there's a good chance that you could find a traditional sale in that neighborhood that's a good sale, because unfortunately or fortunately, however you look at it, a couple foreclosures in the neighborhood is going to bring the value of the other houses down around it. So there's been a lot of times when we've gone in and bought a house at a traditional sale, we got a really good deal on it because other houses in the neighborhood went to foreclosure. And you don't have to go through all of the pain points of renovation and financing and home inspection issues that you deal with when it comes to foreclosure.
Sure. So as we kind of like wrap up here, you know, is there any, you know, if you just kind of want to maybe go over, you know, a handful of the things, you know, that we kind of talked about, and if there's anything that we left out that might be important, you know, as far as, you know, buying a foreclosure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the old adage, if it looks like too good of a, you know,
too good to be true.
Yeah, it probably is, especially when it comes to foreclosure. And the purchase price that you see that's out there, whatever that number is, quantify that with what is it really going to cost to fix it, right? And then you got to think that you don't really know all the things that are wrong. You have to spend the money to find that out through inspections, which is money, which we didn't mention this. This is money that you don't get back, right?
Right, which in this instance is money well spent.
Correct, absolutely. Banks are going to sell it as is and make you sign their contract, which again is very one-sided. And you can spend a bunch of money and a bunch of things go wrong, and the bank chooses not to work with you. And if you're going to get a FHA, USDA, or VA home loan, it's probably not going to work out from the financing aspect. So the flip side of that is, if you are prepared and you understand this process and you learn about it and you have your financing lined up, you can get a good deal on a foreclosure. However, you got to be prepared to take the next step, figure all the things out to fix it, to make it livable, or to get it in the condition that you want it to. But a lot of times it's not as good of a deal as you think it is, just by seeing it on the internet. And you can get a good deal if you do your diligence and you do your research. And a lot of times the longer a foreclosure sits, the better deal that you get. However, when you're a home buyer and you typically are motivated by a timeline, you don't have the luxury of that time.
Yeah.
And another thing is they typically don't sell to 50, 60% on the dollar like you hear on the internet or on an infomercial sometimes. So, I would just say if you can get a good deal on a foreclosure, but if you're thinking about buying a foreclosure, number one, buyer beware, right? You got to work with an agent that really knows foreclosures because it is a special skill set and not many agents know it.
Which
right?
is a great point. If you maybe just real quick elaborate on that, not all agents, are versed in everything, right? So,
Yeah.
certainly a lot of agents aren't versed in foreclosures.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult transaction, so not a lot of agents want to deal with it. So if you are thinking about buying a foreclosure, you've got to get an agent that has a track record of working with banks and has relationship with banks. For us, it's still difficult, and a lot of times we can get on the phone with the bank and we can talk to the person in charge, right? But it's still a difficult process. So I think, just to kind of sum it up, it's buyer beware. Just know what you're getting into. Do your research, do your diligence. You can get a good deal, but just understand the process prior. And if you're on a timeline and it's important to get into a house and you don't want to deal with a bunch of headaches, you might want to go the traditional route. And you can still get a good deal out there if you have a good agent.
Sure. So, yeah, that was a lot of great information, Brandon. So, this was Rich Barr with the Maryland and Delaware Group of Long & Foster.
And this is Brandon Brittingham with the Maryland Delaware Group of Long & Foster.
So we appreciate everybody's time. And if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to give us a call.